time because we have a very, very special guest. This is Brett Joseph. He's known also as Gemini Brett. He's a great astrologer. I really, really admire his work. And I'm so glad he agreed to come here and present for us in this event because I really want you guys to have a huge perspective of how astrology can be understood, can be looked at differently from just horoscopes, predictions. And he gives a very special point of view to astrology because he looks at it from a sacred place, and that's just beautiful. I know it really inspires me, and so thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure, Carolina. I wish I could speak Spanish fluently and we can have this conversation in your language and the language of most of your listeners, I imagine. So my apologies. And thank you also for having me and for translating this conversation so people can hear it.
It's great. It's our pleasure to have you. It doesn't matter the language.
And Jupiter speaks every language. Right? I mean, actually, it was, I was in Peru when I really received astrology. Courtesy of Jupiter, actually. So that was a really wonderful experience. And I look forward to spending some more time in the Southern Hemisphere because I often have really powerful experiences with the sky on the other side of the equator from where I was born and where I live. But yeah, Jupiter did speak to me in English that night because he knows my Spanish is bad. But importantly, I was in a country where everyone else was speaking Spanish and I was just getting my way around with my very small amount.
Yeah, that's so great to hear. South America has a very special place in this new age, in this coming of the new age, because of the Andes Mountains. The geomagnetic force here is like really strong. Right where I am is North South America. I mean, I'm more in a tropical space, but it's great, all these mountains that they go down south.
Yeah, I was really hoping to be there for the total solar eclipse that's coming our way soon, but of course this year has us all stuck in place and all that.
Yeah, nothing to do about that.
So, and the nice thing too is that you and I speak a universal language, the language of the stars.
That's great. Yeah.
And one of the places though that where I'm coming from is that I feel astrology is so much more than some symbolic language alone. That it really is the poetic breath of nature, or that it's the language of nature. And that's really, I think, my principal devotion in my astrological study is to go ask the sky and ask Earth why. So when I learn a thing, right, and I have a bit of distrust of teachers because, of course, growing up in our educational system in modern times, I was taught that astrology is just archaic, superstitious nonsense, right? So it took me a while to break out of that conditioning and actually open myself up to receive, the heavenly voice. Although I was always looking, I just didn't know why, I think. But so now I'm hesitant to trust any teacher. And so even the ones that I most admire and respect, when I hear them say something, I want to go out and engage with the big screen, with the living sky, and ask nature, why do we say this astrological aspect or this planet in this sign is delineated this way? And I think that it's very important for us all to have a living sky experience. I just looked out and I'm seeing a waning moon right outside, right? And I just hear so much in that smile, right? She's moving towards that crescent and that time where she, as a morning being, smiles at us all on her way back into the light. And we begin to understand, I think, this living language rather than what many of us are taught to do, which is like, here's the set of rules
Mhm.
Or here's a set of equations. Now go speak or go do some math. And I
Yeah.
like to say that when we get outside and we renature our astrology, we will remember the roots of the rules and the proofs of the astrological equations we use. And often, so I'll do this because I'm like, I don't know if I believe them. And then this guy will say, yeah, that's absolutely right.
Mhm.
But now I've had a intimate personal experience of why, and so much of what I'm finding out in this practice confirms what we're taught, and some of it challenges what we're taught, but
Mhm.
it also brings me to, my own voice, I guess, slowly developing. I'm a jazz musician, I'm a
You
saxophone
know.
player, and what we do often as horn players is, oh, I like how she plays, I like how he plays, I like how they play, and we learn, to play a little bit like those that we most admire. But in
Mhm.
doing so, especially because you can never play just like them, you stumble your way into your own thing. And I'm kind of in that state of my own astrological investigation right now. There's been a lot of wonderful teachers I've had on earth, um, but mostly they've just helped me open the book of the living sky. And a lot of my study has also been in the sister sciences of
Mhm.
astrology, of sacred geometry and
Astronomy.
musical harmony, which is really helping me find my way too.
That's fascinating. That the approach you make with the music and the astronomy and the geometry is just amazing. And I have to thank you because I've been studying astrology for many years now, since I was like 19 years old back in 96. And of course, my first approach was books, and uh, the teachings that you get. I was living in an ashram at the time, so I was also studying yoga and meditation and everything. But it was until I met you guys. I mean, you guys, because I met you through Astrology Hub. So I met
Uh,
a lot of great astrologers at the time, and like 3 years ago or something. And through you, especially, I heard about the shamanic astrology school, and I was just like, that was amazing, that point of view, and going out, watching the stars, getting in touch with it. It really was another dimension for me of astrology. I'm so grateful for that.
I'm glad to hear you mention, I'm both Astrology Hub, which is near and dear to my heart. In fact, my beloved works for Astrology Hub, and I've collaborated with them many times. And I think it's a wonderful place, like so many of the organizations today that offer many views of our starry science, right? I mean, of course, that can also be confusing because, as I like to say, there's many ways to pet the cosmic cat. And as far as I'm concerned, as long as the cat is purring, we're okay, right?
That's
I'm in a challenging place myself right now because I started at a very modern school, and also a unique modern school, which itself is challenging because when I first got to a conference and was so excited because everybody in the halls is speaking this astrological language that we love, and I knew I wasn't alone, and but I also knew I didn't understand a lot of what people were saying because they were coming from different places, and I saw that the approach that I had learned was very different than what even most modern astrologers were doing. And I had worked in that paradigm long enough at that point, though not too long, but long enough to see that it works well. So there was no question of why is what I'm doing wrong. It was, why is what I'm doing also right? And that then
yeah.
brought me on a quest first into classical astrology, but then into many of the mystery traditions. And I think I'll get back to that, like this idea of the sacred sciences and the quadrivium, which has really informed
Mhm.
my learning and my approach. And it's kind of my ashram, if you will, like what I call the launch pad when I'm drawing circles and crosses and crescents and whatnot. But I'm really glad to hear you mention the shamanic astrology mystery school. That's where I got my start, thanks to friends in a healing circle that I was in, and synchronicities aligned, and three dear friends in the same week said, hey, you really should get a reading with this guy. who's Daniel Jamario, who's the founder of the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School. I actually just spoke to Daniel last night for the first time in a long time. He lives over in Philippines. We had a really wonderful conversation and looking through thousands of years of Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions and patterns and talking about the madness and the opportunities of our time, you know. But yeah, Daniel is very much a sky guy. And he, like myself, and it sounds like you as well, has a lot of love for the ancient builders and the stone circles and the pyramid sites and the many mysterious remnants of ancient cultures and ancient wisdom traditions. And that's a place where I guess truthfully really began my astrological study, though I didn't know I was studying astrology at the time. I mean, I think that's really important when we come to astrology late. Like for you, it was in that first nodal return zone, and for me, not until the second. I was just 30, turning 37 when I had my first session with Daniel. And but it came in quick, and a lot of that was, I swear, thanks to Peru, but also because astrology is life. So as we are students of life, we are students of astrology, right? And so once you start integrating this incredible, dynamic, endless, infinite, beautiful language, and it's so much more than a language, right? It's like all of these different experiences of life, these great questions that really can only be answered by bigger questions. Suddenly there's a whole another greater vocabulary, right, that we can then apply to these great questions that we as seekers have been asking for all of our lives. And I think when we approach astrology in that way, right, as kind of a vehicle for the great questions.
I don't know if you saw a movie called The Arrival. It's about aliens, but I got from that movie that the language is a gift itself. And for me, astrology is a language that changes the way you think. It's like a synthetic language, and it's just great about what you were just saying.
Right, and you're bilingual at least, right? I don't know if you speak other languages. I had this really wonderful experience once, and I'm not, I speak a tiny bit of Spanish, like embarrassing, right? Enough to get the cab to go where I need to go when I'm out journeying. I studied Spanish in high school, but never went for immersion, never integrated. And it's something I really miss because I'm so drawn to the Maya temples. And I'm so drawn to the heart of the Americas, and I mean, Peru has been a really important place for my own, I like to say, a weirdening path. And Mexico in a just a huge way. And I'm very excited to someday be able to explore Guatemala and Belize. And it would be smart for me to get some language, right? But I had an experience once on the other side of it where I was having a haircut from a woman who's a Japanese American woman. And we were just talking as you do, and she was telling me this story. And in the middle of her story, she spoke this sentence in Japanese and then continued in English. And I didn't stop her, but when she was done, I was like, you said this sentence in Japanese in the middle of that. And she goes, "Oh, I did." And she says, you can't say that in English. And it really taught me so much, right? Just like you're saying, and in this movie, The Arrival, right, where they're kind of conveying technology through language, right? How learning two languages helps you become, in a sense, two people, especially when you get to this place, as I'm sure you have and many do, where you're dreaming in both languages, or when you go somewhere on earth, you're kind of connecting into that experience, right? We can maybe see that in locational astrology, which is one of my great passions, right? Your chart where you were in the US, of course, would be different than the birth chart. But I think really importantly, this is a reminder for us now, and I think maybe now we're living in a time in astrology where it's becoming more important again. So let me say something there, and then I'll finish this point I'd love to make. I feel very passionately that we are in a time of an amazing astrological renaissance, right? Astrology, as we know, Western astrology was almost completely burned away, right? By church and now science. But the truth is, astrology is the poetic breath of nature. So she just can't die. But to survive in the West, she had to be revisioned. And there's a great alchemical axiom that says solve et coagula, which means break apart and put back together. And I feel that this has been one of the gifts for Western astrology, where we were so severed from our roots that, in the 70s, and the popular thought was that Vedic or Jyotish astrology, Eastern astrology was the predictive model, and then Western astrology is the psychological model, right? And I think that's because we had been so severed from our classical roots, which now we're learning we're incredibly predictive, right? That we had to dream in a new vision of who astrology is and could be. Because, and it's a beautiful thing. If you ask ancient astrologers what Scorpio is, you're not going to hear this passionate, sexual, deep, transformational, detective. You're going to hear, oh, it's the nocturnal sign of Mars. It's cold and wet. It's associated with the winds of the Southwest, and that, right?
Yeah.
And so there is this gift that astrology has received in the West by being disconnected from her roots, because we've had to dream in this new vision. And, I think I'm one of many who would say, and our dreams may be taking us a little bit too far away. And so then the gifts of some of these great translation projects like Project Hindsight have returned, dusted off the ancient texts. And as you know, speaking of language, we don't have source material for most of these Hellenistic texts. We're going through the Arabic to the Persian to the Roman to get to the Greek or whatever it may be. And that's probably translated from Egyptian, Indian, Babylonian sources that we don't quite have our hands on anymore anyway, right? But it is a time where I feel this renaissance in astrology right now. In some senses, in some circles, it's really more experienced as a schism of you're either a modern astrologer or you're a classical astrologer. But we live in a very beautiful time of astrology where now we can hold this newer psychological approach, and we can also drink from the ancient well of, the founders, and find a way to bring these two back together. But as we do, we're sitting with terms like, even more than we did before, terms like detriment and beseeching, and all the malefic, right? And so where I started in shamanic astrology mystery school, Daniel and Kaylin, like, they don't even utilize dispositorship or rulership. They don't like this idea of rulership. They feel like it's totally patriarchal. Daniel's mentor was Dane Rudjar, who himself was distancing himself from this idea that Venus would be any happier in the sign of Libra than she would be in Aries, where she spends just as much time. But when you get back into the tradition, right, it's so much. It's not just planets and signs and houses and aspects, but there's so much about dispositorship. And I love it because I've got this engineering mind. And also from an archetypal perspective, we can see that Venus, at least what current culture wants Venus to be, feels a lot more Libra than Aries and a lot more Taurus than Scorpio. So there's a beautiful truth of Venus in Aries where she really gets to revolt in a powerful, lovely way against the powers that shouldn't be in this strange culture of today, which always should happen, But there's something to it. But one thing that I'm meaning to say is that not only are we, I think, way showers of this astrological renaissance, if we're willing to hold the antiquity, the modern, bring it together. And what Daniel's point is like, yeah, hindsight, and yeah, whole sign, let's look at that. But let's also go way back to the place where we would sit with the light of the moon reflecting sun to my eyes in this unique way that will never repeat, and receive that transmission directly, right? Do everything we can instead of telling that moon where she is and how she's aligned, to listen with our ears instead of trying to listen with our mouths, right? But so the part of that also is that, and I should bring out my Mercury cup as I say this, that, our languaging is so powerful and so essential. In the beginning was the word. In the beginning was the sound. And so when I read, for example, astrologers who are calling the Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, Capricorn gathering the COVID cluster, it's like, be careful what you wish for, or be careful what you name that seed, for it's going to sprout over the course of decades and decades.
Yeah.
Right? To me, that's the Capricorn Council.
We have to be so careful, no? Because there's such power in sound, like you were just saying. The word is a magical principle, no? You have spells, you have this power you put into words. So yeah, I totally agree with that.
And that side of magic, like, we call it spells for a reason. Yeah. How do you say spells in Spanish? Like magic spells?
Hechizos.
Hechizos. And then how do you say to spell, like to spell a word?
Deletrear is different.
So it doesn't have that relation like we do in English. So this bit was going to be hard to translate for you, right? And, I think importantly, we have this thought often that we need to get back to the source material. That just like that game, that telephone game where you whisper something and then they whisper it to the next person and the next, and by the time it gets back to you, it's some foreign thing you didn't say in the first place, that we fear losing the source information in series of translations. And it's a good fear, but also I think when spirit is in the heart of the translator, the message is going to come through. And it might even be restructured in such a way that is resonant with the evolution of consciousness or species, whatever it may be, with astrology herself, who I'm sure, just like you and me, has the right to evolve. Yeah, I feel there should be as many astrologies as there are astrologers. But it's a very personal thing. I mean, I kind of come at this from two places. I did a retreat with my friends Maurice Fernandez and Claudia Stockter from Mexico City and Onur Doser from Turkey, in Merida, well, in a place called Shishim in the Yucatan Peninsula. Yeah. And my first slide was heart before chart, which is one of my mantras before I sit with somebody, right? Because, like, for example, the other day, I sit with the client and say, we breathe. What is your intention for our journey together? And she says, I want to look at the time when my child was diagnosed with leukemia and shortly after died, right? And then it's just like, oof.
Yeah, right.
And I think the tendency is then to just open the chart, and in a sense, we can then get into the mind and avoid our feelings because that's just so much to hold with somebody. But the appropriate response is, are you okay? How are you with it now? And what a courageous invitation. And, if the chart never gets opened up, we might be able to offer more. And just because I'm not staring at a chart doesn't mean it's not astrology, because everything is astrology. And I can see me using the chart as a way out so often rather than as a way in, because the heart is a tidal place, right? And so my slide, one of my first mantras for me is heart before chart. I'm such a mental guy, just like, let's just be here. Let's assist the person we have the honor to sit with as a counselor to do what they came here to do, even if they don't know. Let's not force them. Let's invite through compassion and love, right? So anyway, Owner, who's a dear friend, a great astrologer, I've spoken at his school in Turkey. If I had a school, he'd be speaking at mine. He's a great teacher. His first slide was only do the chart, right? Because he's doing this classical approach. And it's like, look, there's an answer to every question. And I love classical astrology for that, right? I love, because people used to ask me, hey, is it a good year to make an investment? I really could use some more money. And for me, it's like, hey, let's talk about abundance. Let's not talk about money, and let's be more spiritual, right? But our chart should have an answer. Is it a good year to make an investment? And it's the classical approach I find that really helps you tune into this is yes, this is no, this is when and why. And then, the classical astrology gets scary in that, well, this is what your father did for a living, and this is how many siblings you have, and all that thing, right? It kind of terrifies me. It just, you start feeling like free will dissolves,
You can see it as very deterministic.
Yeah, and I want to be able to hold both of these things. I want to be able to hold that kind of deterministic, predictive happening, especially if it works, right? I'm not going to try to force that if it's not, right? Or I would like to not try to force that if it's not a thing. And the worst for me is when astrologers tell you who you are. Right? You see it all the time. People are like, no, that's not really, no. Oh, but it was this way. And you start trying, because we need to confirm our science, right? Instead of saying, and this is true for any scientist, let's do an experiment, but just bend it so it confirms my theory. And that's a potential danger of astrology that we need to be very careful with, right? I mean, I love to say this about our sacred science. Let's keep it sacred by keeping it scientific. But also, let's keep it scientific by keeping it sacred. If for you, the chart is just something on a little screen, and it's this map of the soul, but you forget that it's a map of the sky, and that's the real screen out there, the big screen, right? You've lost your science. How can you be in that sacred connection to it, right? And on the other side, let's learn the rules and the equations, and let's see how they develop through time, and let's tune into the arguments, and let's challenge ourselves to say, does this really work? And I mean, I'm coming in with these theories all the time, but where does the rubber meet the road, as they say? Am I willing to put it to the test and do the research and put that time in to see if this actually works? And on one level, as a counselor, if it's helping somebody help themselves, it's good. You could read the wrong chart, and if it helps somebody help themselves, it's good, But on that science side, like, I would like for the chart to have an answer for who's going to win the election. Instead of us sitting down and saying, well, this is who I want to win the election, so let me choose the techniques that say that person, right? And then when they win, I can say, see, I told you so, right? And if the other one wins, then I can just go hide anyway, because I don't want to come outside, right? So on that kind of science level, it would be beautiful if our astrology could kind of get back there. But we also don't want to be handcuffed by this craft. Because you know how it was before you cast electional charts to do everything you do, and you would just follow your feelings, trust your intuition, and now it's like, wait a second, the moon is void, and this planet's retrograde and applying to square, and it's gonna testify, and it's like, and you can never do anything but like hide, right? Like that's astrology gone very wrong.
It's a very delicate, equilibrium that we should, I mean, not just find, but maintain, it's hard, but it can be done.
But it can be done, right? And that's the great challenge. And if we're willing to enter that, that is a gateway that helps us see beyond the veil, where there is some clarity for some of these great questions that really can never be answered. And that's where astrology first is a way in, right? Let me go look at these things that I'm hiding from in me, right? But now that I'm willing to see that, now I'm willing to see more of the world. And that requires courage. And when we have our own philosophies and cosmologies challenged by our craft, good. We have to be prepared for that. So in the mystery traditions, it's said that astronomy was one of 4 sacred sciences known as the quadrivium. And I shift here because I cannot be more grateful that I found my way stumbled my way really into a study of astrology's sister sciences. First of all, what we call astrology is actually correspondences. Astrology truly is the rainbow bridge between the quantity of the heavenly happenings, and that's astronomy, right? Like Jupiter and Saturn are now so many degrees apart. You can put a ruler up there. You can measure it. You can measure their declination and their relative latitudes and their celestial longitudes and, all that. That's quantity, right? Just as this that noise is measurable. There's frequency and amplitude, right? But that noise, the quantity of sound, won't tell me how that inspires you versus how it would inspire somebody else, right? Who might have been doing something in their house and listening to this, although I guess many people will be reading, but they're like, what happened? Well, where did that noise come from? Right? But so there's this wonderful axiom, which is, or a great riddle. If a tree falls in the woods and nobody's there to hear it, does it make a sound? And my answer to that is it does not. It makes a noise. It vibrates the medium. There's frequency and amplitude and this. But conscious ears must experience noise for a sound to happen. And each individual is going to have their own experience. That's the quality of tone, where the noise is the quantity. So the astronomy is the quantity, what's measurable. Jupiter and Saturn will conjoin on December solstice 2020, and we know this. But how that dances you versus how that dances me, right? That's quality. And the beautiful truth is, between noise and sound, we have a sacred science known as musical harmony that can help me understand a little bit about what noises are apt to move me based on where I'm coming from and my experiences and, the folk music of my culture, if I had one, and all that, right? But astrology is such a more powerfully developed bridge between the quantity of the heavenly happenings, the astronomy, and the quality, which is not astrology, that's correspondences. It was said And for me, these are just all whispers coming down to me from different teachers, or sometimes even things I hear in the dark of the night staring at the moon or whatever it may be, because there's no textbooks. But the beautiful thing is the subject is the text and you are the teacher. Because if you want to learn astronomy, what you do is you go outside and you engage with the earth and the sky. And it can be helpful to bring a guide, but at some point, you're the only one that will open the doors to that temple, right? Because we each have our own personal sky temple. So the whisper was that astrology was the highest of the lower mysteries. Right? So then you get to say, okay, well, what's above astrology, right? And I don't know. I mean, I think some of the things that we're using astrology for, compassion, grace, manifestation, right? In that sense of like conscious, electional astrology, right? Like there is something above astrology that many things that astrology is helping us sniff, sense. But we can say what is the mysteries that are below astrology. I do this little quote fingers because I don't, when I say below, mean lesser than.
Yeah.
But rather I'm speaking of that which astrology herself is composed of. Because astrology, again, is the bridge between astronomy and correspondences.
Mm-hmm.
So if we have an intimate experience of the astronomy, we're going to have a more intimate experience of the correspondences. Mm-hmm. If I go look at the sun right now, I have no idea what stars it's aligned to. Right? This is why the 12th house is hidden things. The sun rises to illuminate the earth, becomes visible in the 12th, but we say it's invisibility because the sun illuminates the earth, but hides the sky.
Blinds the sky, yeah.
Right? But this morning, and I was up and I should have looked, I could have gone out and drank some of that moon and seen what stars she's aligned to and looked at her shape, which will tell me how far from the sun she is if I've learned to see. Mm-hmm. And all I have to do is add that amount of degrees to where the moon is to know where the sun is, right? Yeah. So this is one higher way that the light of soul reflects the light of spirit to matter. Moon reflecting sun to earth, just as Diana delivered Apollo's birth. Yeah. But so if I know that astronomy, as the ancients said, or it's whispered, they said, is number in time and space, then I can learn astronomy more intimately if I understand number itself, right? Which is an interesting thing because I love math. I'm an engineering degree geek like that. But though I know that 1 + 1 is always 2, that's only because in school, I was convinced that number is only quantity.
Yeah.
But number also has quality. So if I contemplate oneness, I'll understand that you can never add oneness to anything. It's everything. As Hermes said, all things have been and arose from one by the mediation of one. So all things have their birth in this one thing by adaptation, right? And that's the birth of the crescent of soul. But I can learn something more about number. And astrology is a great exercise in the quantity of number. We suddenly have to learn to count in 12s and 30s and stuff, right? It's like a different language, if you will, even within that realm of quantity. But it also helps us understand more about the quality of number, the quality of nature, the quality of life, because number is these things. And we know Pythagoras whispered something about that. So in a sense, the quadrivium, which is the 4 sacred sciences, one is number. And at the top, if you will, is number in time and space, which is
Okay.
astronomy. And there's two paths there, which are number in space, and that's sacred geometry. So for me, this pattern, which many call the seed of life, which is 6 circles around one to make 2 6-petaled flowers,
Like you
one
should.
inside the circle and one outside. This is the zodiac. This is, I think, the greatest expression of creation, creating in 12. And then another one is we have 12 tones in an octave. And you can say, well, that's just arbitrary. That's just this Western thing. But it actually happens in the natural resonance of sound, which is number in time. That's vibration or frequency. And beautifully, we have 12, and we also have 7.
Yeah.
Right. So I decided yesterday, we're recording this on December 8th. Yesterday, I decided December 7th, which we write 12/7 and many would write 7/12. I decided it's quadrivium day.
Yeah.
Because everywhere in these sciences, you have this 7 begets 12, just as in classical astrology, we have 7 lights, 7 planetas, 7 wanderers, and 12 signs, right? And the beautiful thing is you can hear that in number and time. You can see that in number and space, and it's more, they say, and this is a heavy thing to say for some, but that when you put the compass in your hand, you become God. I mean, it's a lot to handle, right? But I think the reason why that was whispered is it reminds us that geometry, measuring the earth, and drawing geometries, so sacred geometry lands better for the current consciousness. Because when we hear that word geometry, we're like, oh, proofs of Euclidean in high school, right? Or number itself was called arithmetic. I'm like, I hesitate to share that word because we have such a
bad experience with the education system.
many people have bad experience where we just get shut down, but we also have just an incorrect idea of what that is when we hear that word, because for us that's just 1 + 1 = 2, and 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10, and you got to 2 before you ever were asked to contemplate oneness. Imagine what this world would be if children were invited to contemplate oneness before we presented the concept of 2. But also maybe that's not what children are meant to do. I mean, I love Steiner. He's like, don't wait with the numbers, people, right? But some of us just gravitate there, love it, want to know the code. And I think it's okay. And I don't think you can force on the young mind, if you will, hey, let's contemplate oneness. Like there's just too much to do. I mean, that tends to, I think, be an invitation that is typically extended through crisis in our lives, where we're asked to open our eyes and ask more, right? So importantly, this idea of the quadrivium, such a beautiful thing I feel there is we have a intimate experience of it. And as we're studying why they say when you become God, when you put the compass in your hand, is you're really studying creation through the act of creating. And the reason why that happened for me, I'll tell you the truth, I was in a medicine ceremony in a building that this once belonged to. Okay, this was part of a central pillar around which eventually a very beautiful regular hexagonal temple was constructed in Washington. And at the time, I was in a really deep study of the Venus star, the pentacle that Earth and Venus and Sun describe in our dance, right, through the heavens. And so I'm in this place and I was like, oh, I wish it was a pentagon. I wish it was astrological. And in my meditation that night, Spirit was like, okay, child, right? Like, it's time to teach you what the hexagon is.
The mystery of the hexagon, yeah.
Right, it's time, and let's see why there's one on Saturn's pole that's 3 times the size of Earth. And, let's see why the bees build in these, right? And, the message was stop watching these geometry videos on YouTube and playing with your flower of life stickers and put a compass in your hand. And instantly it's like, oh my gosh, of course 6. And this is where we get all of our element glyphs and so much more. And the 6 is the lines, right? Like the quantities version of a perfect form of the circle. Because
the micro and the macrocosm, right?
Yeah, I mean, this distance equals this distance. So if you inscribe a regular hexagon in a circle, the side length is equal to the radius. So this is the lines version of the circle, which we are told is spirit, right? The circle of spirit, the crescent of soul, and the cross of matter. And the circle is the 2-dimensional expression of the sphere, which it's whispered was known as the heavenly form, the perfect form, the goddess, right? And so we're here to kind of hold both of these consciousnesses, this circle, which is immeasurable. It's quality. For me to know the circumference of the circle, I have to utilize a formula that involves pi, this transcendental, never-ending number, right? Pi. Or I have to take a string and circle it and cut my string so it's a line and I can measure lines, right? So there's part of us, and this I think gets back to where we are in this renaissance of astrology right now. There's part of us that's very linear. Let's learn the rules. Let's learn the equations. Let's learn to apply them. And there's part of us that is, and I wholeheartedly believe should be, very curvy. That while the shortest distance between here and there might be a short line, that's also the least interesting route. And it's not about going there, it's about going there, right? And the journey is so much more important than the destination. And we as counseling astrologers, or as astrological students, or as students of life, or as human beings, would be wise to remember that in a linear world, we must retain the curvy essence of the dream. And that's how we will awaken into this living dream that we're experiencing, right? And astrology, I think, offers a lot of this, but to help us get to this, right? And that's astrology as a way in rather than astrology as a way out. And that's what I'm all about. Even if it's gonna, take me on a journey of, well, why do we say the circle of spirit and the crescent of soul and the cross of matter? What does that mean? And so I want to get into the lines and the compass and the square and the musical harmony and the number and all that, but I'm only doing that to help my mind stay occupied as together with my heart we journey into the depths of soul and spirit and ask these great questions. The greatest question there is, why?
Many of the people that are going to be watching us are astrology students, and I just value so much that they can get this vision, that it's not just about the lines, about the, the techniques and the predictive stuff, but it's also about a path, a soul path, that's the way you present it, and it's beautiful. I don't know what else to say. I'm just, I always,
one more
I love
thing
the
I'll
way
say as we close down here, Carolina, is that, it's interesting in this strange year in which we're meeting here in 2020, where we all predicted, something crazy was going to go down. And I think the only benefit there is that people who have been on the fringe of, does astrology have anything worthwhile to say, is like, okay, Like these cats, more than anyone else, were really talking about get ready for something, right? And also that because people have been taken away from their normal routines, often in the case, though sadly, of course, this will hurt for so many. There will be so many in poverty. I mean, there's so much that's being ignored, you know, in this kind of distraction of our collective compassion into one place. We're staying blind to, I think, you know, where the heart really should be at this time, and also the mind, and that's a tale for another time. But I think very importantly, we have all been offered the opportunity this year, if we have the means to survive and be okay, which is not true for everyone, but if we do, we have been given the opportunity to slow down and think about what really counts. No pun intended. Well, actually, yes. But so many of us instead are speeding up. Now, for me, and I imagine for you, one of the reasons is because many now have an opportunity to pursue their passion. And for so many of us mystics, this is astrology. So I'm sure you, like me, have had more students this year. It's also a very challenging time. And so for those who can, with means, you know, it's a wonderful time to receive some counseling, see where you are on the path. And I'm sure you, like me, and also many of our listeners are benefiting from an advanced astrological learning of how does this thing apply to this chart and this chart and this chart and this chart and how does this noise, you know, how dance and become a song for this person versus this person. It's an amazing thing to observe, right? But so many students that I'm sitting with, they're like, I just took this course and this course and this course, and I'm still waiting. This one's in queue. And what are we going to learn today? And I'm like, whoa, look, you can't have a breakthrough without taking a break. And this is, I think, one of the most important things in my encouragement to students new and old, right? To the initiate and to the seasoned sage. Number one, the sky has a story that can only be spoken through your personal language. And when you develop that relationship, I literally can't say this without tearing up, right? So when you develop that relationship, your gifts will become more available to those that you have come here to grace. But number two, it's an amazing place to take a break and integrate. Why did you come here in the first place? Because the heavens remind you you can never know it all. And this is a mysterious and awe-inspiring place. So if your local government will allow, in these terrible times of control, get outside, take off your shoes, get your feet in the soil, lay on your back, become the earth, and open her eyes to the heavens. And just take a break and allow that temple time to be a space where you can integrate, so the mind doesn't race away from the heart, but that information will become a funnel into that place of your feelings.
And I think that's most important with the coming tension that we're going to have between Aquarius, you know, the mind, very busy mind, and Taurus, which means we have to embody whatever we are, you know, getting here in the head. So
it's such a beautiful thing that is happening, that Aquarius Jupiter and Aquarius Saturn will square Taurinus, as I like to call Uranus and Taurus. While, as we know, we're also engaging in this amazing elemental shift of the 20-year rhythm of the Jupiter-Saturn great conjunctions, who spend about 200 years in an element. And though they gave us a flavor of the air and the 1980, 1981 conjunctions. It was in 2000, their last meeting in the sign of Taurus. So now as they first engage in the first degree of Aquarius, which some astrologers, I'll say, are calling the dawning of the age of Aquarius, and really that's breaking the rules. It has nothing to do with the tradition of what the turning of the age is about. If folks want to learn what I have to say about that, and why it's very confusing as to when the dawning of the age of Aquarius actually is, and also why, regardless of that, we are very clearly, and there are very clear images in the sky that the Maya were tuned into, and the Egyptians and the biblical, and that we live in a time of a very powerful shift, but we need to look north and south rather than east. So I'll just leave that there. People can find me at GeminiBrett.com, and there's a offerings page where you'll find a lot of my videos, including this one I'm speaking of, which is called The Sun on the Cross and the Turning of Ages.
I saw that, and that was just like mind-blowing.
It's maybe too much in a little space. Hopefully this one was a little slower, but
write a lot and then rewatch it so I can take it all in.
I love hearing it, right? But I love what you just showed too. Let's write a lot, because let's bring the marriage of the body and the mind by invoking the nature of Hermes, of Thoth, right? The scribe. Because when we allow our body to engage with mind, when we allow our earth to engage with air, we find the heart that resides in the middle. And we do have the opportunity individually, I would love to think culturally, collectively, globally. I would love to think that. Sometimes it's hard to stay, to keep the faith, but I do what I can, right? We definitely, the way that will work is if we each individually choose to understand that we are at a time that is offering an amazing capacity to solve very real problems if we are willing to face the problem rather than being distracted into thinking that the problem is this or that to keep us away from where it's really at. And you will know what it is when it hurts your soul, because we all have really deep healing to do. And I feel it's likely that the year to come will offer opportunities for those who wish to engage that won't necessarily feel so easy, but out of that tension and shock, and even perhaps what we might call remembrance of trauma, there will be an opportunity to come to a much deeper state of healing and compassion. And very importantly, I think we'll be reminded that you can't know compassion without first knowing passion. So whatever you love, right, that is the path, that is your classroom, that is your temple. And the more we can each step into our own temple, whether it's on the earth or in the sky or wherever it may be, the more we will serve the collective awakening. So instead of waiting for some sacred calendar to flip the page into fixing this whole thing, it's time for us to understand that the so-called avatar of the new age is me and you and each of us individually. And as we fix ourselves together, we will fix the world. So I'm glad, Carolina, that you brought us kind of back out of the philosophy and the theory into like what really matters, because there is no doubt that we are living at a challenging time, and where there is challenge, you know, these might just be the labor pains for the birth of something much more beautiful. And it's time for us, air, to remember to breathe and do some Lamaze and not run away from the experience of the body, because that is where the heart lives, and the heart is the one that has the answers we could never figure out with our mind.
I am very, very thankful again for you being here and offering this particular and unique point of view of everything we just talked about astrology, but also life, also, the connection with this sacred dimension. Um, I am really thankful, and I will write everything.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you for being the scribe and translating this so I can speak to some who I'm not yet educated enough to share a tongue. And I very much appreciate the invitation and that you are doing this for those who have the honor to tune into your wisdom. And it's really nice to connect with you here in space. And may this happen on Earth someday. So we drank a Mercury cup earlier, but I'm going to finish with where I began, which is a cup of the moon, because heart before chart.
I love those cups.
Thank you so much, sister, for having me today.
Before we go, you mentioned your website before, but I will also know, I will also need to tell people what kind of classes or courses you give. I love the astronomy for astrologers, because that's something I will engage with. But I don't know if you have any other courses going on or classes.
Yeah, and there's many offerings on my page. Right now, I am about to spend some time with my friend Maurice Fernandez, and we're going to do a series of 5 classes together about the coming eclipse and eclipse series, and the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, and the Saturn-Uranus square, and Jupiter-Uranus squares, and synodic cycles, and the elemental dance of the great Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions. And we're going to do a series of ceremonies leading up to that conjunction as well. So folks might be hearing this after that's already happened, but it will be available. And I'll have that at GeminiBrett.com. Brett with twin T's, as Gemini should be. So GEMINIBRET.com.
I will write it down.
And I will be teaching for the Organization for Professional Astrology next year that's OPA. So opaastrology.org. They're going to have a virtual retreat in April. And the OPA retreats are great because while you do experience short lectures from many astrologers, most of the time you are in the classroom, a small classroom with one teacher. And I'll be teaching astrolocality, astrocartography, local space, the geodetic map. It's just one of my great passions. And I start from a pretty astronomical point of view. I really feel like if we can see why these maps do what they do, we can hear more of what they can offer. And then I've created an astronomy for astrologers curriculum for OPA's certification program. And that will be offered next in June or July of 2021. We haven't figured out the dates quite yet. And I think I will also start teaching astronomy for astrologers through Kepler College next year. And well, you mentioned another place where there's a conversation about offering more of a sacred astronomy approach, because I really love to turn people onto the messages of the living sky, not through like nerdy science class measurement, declination, right ascension. We have to embrace some of that and know that vocabulary, which is a different place. But it starts with literally laying on your back, opening your eyes, understanding that it is so infinite, you can never know it all. So release yourself from the stress, because the password to the temple of the sky is awe and wonder.
Yeah.
So there will eventually be more courses at GeminiBrett.com. I'm so busy learning and counseling that it's hard to sit down. Especially, I really, really am particular at this point in my career to present information beautifully. And it takes a lot of time to create the slides.
But it's
things.
awesome. I really admire that too, because yeah, I don't know, I'm a very visual person. So I really think I can take a lot more in when it's presented that way. It's very graphic. you're doing a great job doing that.
But it used to be that, and I would always have live musicians when I spoke astrology in the beginning too. So I was doing that mostly at like yoga spots, and we were sitting on the ground, and I'd have musicians playing, you know. Oh, so, and I guess let me share one thing that I'm doing. I study all sorts of astrology, and you can book a counseling session with me at GeminiBrett.com. There's a short session for 33 US. So, you know, if you want to just check out what I do and come in at kind of an introductory short rate, there's that for you. But one thing I'm doing is I'm always looking for more ways to convey this astrological information in such a way that it can land not only in the mind and the brain, but also in the heart mind and in the body mind. One way that I do this is I team up with my dear friend Eric Deutsch, who's a wonderful grand piano player. And I take your birth chart and I translate it into musical harmony. And then I give that to Eric, and he creates a 12-minute song of your soul, as we call it. And it's been a
I read about that, and it's just awesome. I think I'm going to get one of those for myself, because I just think it's so magical.
I'm really stoked to hear that. Yeah, we've done about 100 now. I'm just gonna work on 2 more when we get off.
Wow.
So that's been a real treat, because I think that astrology's great gift is we can really learn so much about ourselves, including things that we are hesitant because it's difficult until we make our way through it. But one of the great challenges is that it can just be so mental. And again, that's astrology as a way out. So I'm always looking for ways that people can experience their chart, learning to see it in the sky, right? Learning to hear it in this way. So anyway, those are a few things that I'm up to. And thank you for asking. And Carolina, again, thank you so much for having me here. It's really sweet to connect with you live rather than just on the social text places that we do.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you so much again. And well, we're going to continue with our program on this event called Reimaginando el Futuro 2021. That's reimagining